Hey everyone, welcome to Logan's Mosh Pit. Glad to have you here. Do me a favor and please subscribe if you haven't already. Also consider joining my Patreon page for some cool perks. I'll leave a link in the description. Gather round, bookworms, because it's time for another episode of Rock and Read. Today we'll read chapter 15 of It's So Easy and Other Lies by Duff McKagan. Chapter 15 is called Contract. Here we go. Just as the record label frenzy around us was heating up, some fallout from our Gardner Space partying hit us. The cops busted down our door one night looking for Axel. They wanted him to answer what turned out to be a bogus charge. Our days became numbered there at Gardner. Axel didn't do the crime or time, but the incident inspired a great song, Out to Get Me, which we quickly added to our sets in early 1986. You can hear the depth of our collective anguish in that song. Ourselves that the record labels might get wind of the situation and break off their courtship. You can't catch me. I'm innocent. Axel avoided the storage space for weeks, eluding capture until the charges were dropped. And the news didn't get out that our singer was looking at jail time. Everybody took us out for meals. Different management companies, all the labels. The swank restaurants where people had business lunches weren't just a side of LA I hadn't seen. They were a side of life I had never experienced. Well, except in the bowels of the establishments where I worked as a dishwasher and later a baker. I called Kim from the Fastbacks after a few of these outings, trying to adjust to the idea of being pursued for a record contract. It's weird, I told her. These guys, men in business suits, take us out for lunch. You can order anything you want. They didn't take us to Spago. We weren't worth that much, and we were also pretty filthy. I remember going to meet David Geffen at his office. As we were hanging out in the lobby, employees coming and going, didn't realize we were a band. They thought we were street people. After a while, we asked to go to the same place as often as possible, a place up on Sunset at the edge of Beverly Hills called Hamburger Hamlet. I never had a hamburger there, but they had a full bar. Despite all these meetings, I was nervous when it came time to finalize a deal. I deemed myself more experienced than the other guys, having been through this once before, albeit with a tiny indie label. But I was out of my league. I didn't fully understand the business. In fact, I didn't really understand it at all. I wasn't even going to pretend that I could handle a deal like this. We still didn't have a proper manager. Fortunately, we hired a lawyer. He explained things to us. Preparing to enter into a contract brought changes in our intra-band relationships. We had to create a legal framework for what had been just a one-for-all and all-for-one gang. I didn't even know we needed a partnership agreement. Why would we? Hey, we're bros. But our lawyer got us protected within the band, and I will always be thankful for that. He did a great job lassoing in a bunch of guys and making sure we understood the implications of various aspects of the contracts among the band members and between the band and the label. Splitting future publishing royalties caused a real clash. In the old days, with Rogers and Hammerstein and other writing teams of the American songbook tradition, one person did music and one did lyrics. But songwriting didn't work that way for most bands by the 1980s, and certainly not for our band. Guns wasn't one of those bands where one person wrote all the songs, or even a band where two people collaborated on the songs like the Stones. We had done everything together and in so many different ways. We found ourselves arguing about things we'd never had to deal with before. No, I wrote that part. No, I wrote that part. Everyone had his own version of how things had gone down. It got heated for about a week as we tried to hash it all out. Since it was so difficult to say who had done what with our songs, we finally agreed to split everything equally across the board. Our lawyers enshrined it in writing, and thank God for that. After all the liquid lunches, Chrysalis offered the biggest advance, something like $400,000. We weren't going to go with Chrysalis. Like most of the record companies, they wanted to soften us up, both musically and image-wise. Geffen's offer was much smaller, $250,000, but Tom Zutaut, the A&R guy pursuing us on Geffen's behalf, was saying all the right things about how we should be protected. He got it. Tom said we would have absolute artistic freedom at Geffen, and that was the clincher for us, but only after it was in writing. Our lawyer took care of that too. Our songs were by far the most important thing to us, worth far more than the extra money offered by labels not willing to give us free rein. No one was going to tell us how to make our record. Every step of the way I was thinking, nobody can ever take this away from us. We will have been signed by a major label. Getting a major label deal was considered massive, life-changing. There was no big fanfare when we finally signed a 6-record deal on March 26, 1986. We never even looked at one another and said anything like, "Holy." We took $75,000 of the advance up front, divided it by 5, $15,000 for each of us, and took half of each of our shares, $7,500, immediately. We had our new accountants sock the other half away to pay for personal expenses as we recorded our debut album. The balance of the advance, $175,000, would be administered by the accountants to cover legitimate band costs and the making of the album. While the ink was still wet on the contract with Geffen, we rented a cheap rehearsal space out in Glendale near the Burbank line. We had to get out of Gardner for various reasons, but we were careful not to go to SIR in Hollywood or some similarly expensive place. Our new space was in an old rundown shopping center, now long gone, called the Golden Mall. There was a stage. We had to move our gear out every day. It wasn't ours 24 hours a day with a lock or anything. We didn't have that kind of money. Our room at the Golden Mall was where the checks were delivered to us. Slash and I took our checks to a bank out in Glendale. We didn't open accounts. We went in and asked to cash the checks. That raised alarms, I guess. They had to call a bunch of people, including the accountants at Geffen. It didn't help that Slash's check was made out to Stash. Axel didn't get a bank account either. Like Slash, he had yet to change his name officially and refused to take out an account in any name other than Axel. So all of us ended up keeping our money in our boots or stashed under mattresses. Not that the money lasted long. I had gone into Guitar Center by our Gardner space so many times to scope out the perfect setup for myself that I'm sure the sales guys there were totally shocked. I suddenly walked in one day and bought all the stuff I had just looked at so many times before, with cash. I'm sure they had long since put me in the never gonna buy a thing category. I bought the Fender Jazz Special and Galen Kruger 800 RB that have helped mold my bass sound to this day. I also got my first tattoos. 2 guns and a rose on my left shoulder, a dagger that says Guns N' Roses, and a dragon, all 3 of them within a few weeks. I bought some cowboy boots and a couple pants. We all bought new clothes, which had been a rare luxury up to then. I also bought a steel chain and a chunky little padlock and started to wear that around my neck. It was just like the one worn by Sid Vicious, the bass player in the Sex Pistols. I was determined to carry that torch, the punk rock torch, regardless of where this major label deal took us. Call it punk rock guilt. At the time we received our advance, I was crashing on and off with a girl in Hollywood. We all had a few girls with whom we could stay if we needed a break from the loft at the rehearsal space on Gardner. Some were friends with benefits. Some were just friends. Now, however, I put myself on a small stipend that could pay my rent, or half rent, I should say, for about 6 months. Another friend of mine was looking to move to Hollywood from her parents' house somewhere down in Orange County. She and I decided we could share a 1-bedroom apartment we found on Crescent Heights, just below Sunset. She would get the bedroom, and I would get the floor of the dining room, which I cordoned off with a sheet to create my little den of darkness. The finishing touch on my lush new lifestyle was to fill the refrigerator. I could afford to eat. This was major label success. Suddenly, I didn't need to keep my job anymore either. I had $7,500 in an envelope in my boot. We were going to be entering a recording studio to make an album. We were going to tour. As at every job, the guys at this place knew I was a musician and knew that was my thing. They had even come to a few shows, tracksuits and all, to see what it was all about. The problem was, I knew a lot of things about a business that wasn't exactly run by the books. How do you quit a job like that? Was there a debriefing process for leaving a mob job? This eventuality had never crossed my mind in the year I worked there. I went into the office of one of the bosses after we signed. "We just signed our deal this morning, and I don't have to work anymore." His expression didn't change for a second. He just sat there looking blankly at me. I began to sweat. Was I going to have to give him a cut of the money in my boot? Then his face slowly lightened. He took an unhurried breath and he said, "You do good, Mikey. You do good." He wanted to know that the label wasn't ripping us off. I let out a silent sigh of relief. We played a celebratory gig at the Roxy, or rather two, an early show and a late show on March 28, 1986. To be honest, the shows had been booked prior to our signing with Geffen. They were supposed to be label showcases. Events overtook our plan, however, so we took out full-page ads in the local music papers to announce the gigs. Geffen recording artist Guns N' Roses live at the Roxy. Everyone in Hollywood already knew, of course, we were throwing money around, buying rounds of drinks for our friends. We all had fresh tattoos at the Roxy shows, and people wanted to touch them. Touch. We felt like we ran the city that night. My old bosses even came. They stood out like sore thumbs in a room packed with Hollywood street trash like us, helping us celebrate our collective takeover. They sent a bottle of champagne to us backstage. I was touched by the gesture, and we thanked them during our first set. The icing on the cake came a week later when Guns rechristened the Whiskey A Go-Go on April 5th. The legendary Sunset Strip venue was being converted back into a club after serving as a bank for a few years. The poster asked, "When was the last time you saw a real rock and roll band at the Whiskey A Go-Go?" And since it was assumed we'd be making a record soon and then be off to tour the world, or, as eventually was the case, one-horse towns in the Canadian Rust Belt, below that it was written, "This could be your last chance." Reopening the Whiskey was sweet. It meant that somehow, despite the fact that nobody gave us the time of day on the Strip during the year it took us to find an audience for our idiosyncratic sound and style, we now embodied LA rock and roll to the extent that this legendary venue wanted to associate itself with us to restake its claim on the city's musical landscape. We had moved the dial at the club level. Now, could we do the same on record, on radio, on MTV? Fat chance. Well, that's the end of Chapter 15. Let me know what you thought of Chapter 15 in the comments below. Before I go, I want to give a special shout out to my supporters on Patreon, Matt and Stacy from Canada. That does it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate the support. I'll see you next time. Till then, rock on.